basically point works that we got between 20 and 2021. It's more or less similar. There's a few drops here and there on training frequency, which, yeah, we probably have dropped a little bit in the frequency that we run training compared to last year. But in terms of teamwork improving, most of the other stuff has stayed relatively the same. So then moving forward onto our DLCs, which is actually a really good stat to see, which does help to improve us in terms of what we can run if we want to run special missions or, change the repo around and everything as well. We did see a general increase in a lot of the C DLCs, basically what people own with that. So obviously the last 2020 survey didn't have things like SOG or SOG and Iron Curtain. It did have the Globbob DLC though, which had very low ownership compared to a lot of the other DLCs we have on here. As you can see, it's good to see that Apex is owned by majority of the player base. So if we ever do decide to run missions on Snow again, we should have no issues here. But one thing that was really, really surprising for Hawaiian and I to look at in terms of this data, a lot of people own SOG, and that will be very important as to what we're going forward later. And here is the man himself, just arrived 4 minutes late.
I'll be back in a minute.
Oh, God damn it. But yeah, so as you can see, in terms of the ownership, for most of the regular DLCs, majority of the player base own them. Tanks, Jets, Contact, and I think there's only been a couple of cases throughout the several years that we have used DLC content, such as Laws of War or the Tanks DLC, where someone has bought a DLC mid-mission. But for the most part, that means we can use those assets and know that's not going to create an issue or drama in 9 out of 10 missions, which is really good for us. But moving forward from the CDLCs and the DLCs, we're moving forward onto the graph of the first and the third person case. More or less it stayed the same from what it was last year. We always put this question out as there is a divide between sometimes with staff and a lot of the community as well as to what's better, what's more fun or what's more challenging. Having the first person only force in all vehicles. I know a lot of people like to fly like this. I personally like driving. It's quite immersive in first person, but obviously it does grind down the gameplay for a lot of people. And so the graph on here has pretty much stayed the same, with the majority of the player base saying that they like how it is with the force first person infantry and third person standard vehicles and air. So, as based off the feedback, that's how it's going to stay. Moving on to the missions per fortnight. It is really good to see, and we were really happy with this as well, to see that a large majority of the player base can attend pretty much 4 or more missions a fortnight. Because that means that we can have that as a metric for mission makers to kind of figure out, it's like, okay, well, do we have the option of running something unique? Are people going to come? Or, are we going to pick an asset like such as armored vehicles and not have enough people show up for a mission that would kind of design around those armored vehicles? So it's nice to see that for the most part, people attend anywhere from 3 to 6 missions a fortnight. And obviously the people who can't attend that probably got work or other things on there. So doesn't mean we'd have to change our nights in terms of how we run things, or it doesn't mean that the mission makers have to change the type of style and what assets they want to go. And we hope that we can improve this trend with the use of mission variety to basically get, if people can show up, they will show up because they want to play armor, because they enjoy our missions. I'm hoping Hawaiian's back here because that most of our metric parts, and I believe this will hand off to you now, Hawaiian, for the stuff, your favorite part so far.
Where are we? What are we on?
I've just gone through all the metrics.
Okay, yeah,
And so fostering of leaders by staff.
Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, let me get a moment to catch my breath. Pull up the PDF. Okay, all right. So, fostering leaders by staff, I guess, actions. So, we've had recent sort of internal talks about leadership, and that's why we pose the question to you players, because we have two main goals in mind, and those are to improve the leadership variety, and that's mainly to reduce burnout of existing leaders. We all know our favorite Platcom duo, Jamor and Hawaiian, and they don't enjoy playing Platcom every single mission. But yeah, and it's not just us; it's definitely a variety of people who play here, and don't want to take squad leader every mission or other roles. So we definitely wanted to aim to improve the leadership variety to reduce burnout, and our second thing is in doing that, developing some new strong leaders. So, as with every single other armor unit, training and moderating leadership is really difficult. I think it's probably the biggest challenge for all units out there. I think it's probably the biggest challenge because leaders, to an extent, control the amount of fun in the mission. So the mission maker, puts all the troops down and sets up the scenario and makes the fun, and then the leaders sort of control the fun throughout the mission. And that's, don't want to scare people off by saying that, but that is, somewhat true, or at least true to an extent. So, maybe an example of that is an experienced leader might blitz through an objective, and your fire teams might take a bunch of contact, and you're doing the right things like bounding over open ground, so fewer people go down, and so that's fun. Whereas maybe an inexperienced leader who is just stepping up for their first time, and it's not their fault, but sometimes they make poor decisions, and that leads to things like mass cas or going slow through objectives and whatnot. And it's very difficult to moderate that because everybody starts experienced, and making mistakes is necessary to improving. And most vital to that is the willingness to improve. But yeah, very, very difficult thing. Actually, I think I go into moderating it later, so I'll touch on that later. So this has been going on for the past month, maybe, and so I think we've had some good success in getting a few new leaders stepping up, especially some of the new people coming through in the past 2 or so months. I should be monitoring Armor General. Let me bring it up. Okay, cool.
I can monitor it for you. I have several monitors, so I can just bounce it around.
Listen, this guy's several monitors. I just got 2, mate. All right. Where was I? Yeah, we think we've had some good success, especially people who joined maybe 2 or 3 months ago, coming up and taking leadership roles. Regardless, we still wanted the position or the opinions of the community on this. And so if you look through all the feedback, there is a ton of it, which is really good of you guys to spend your time to write all of it out. So thank you very much. Very happy about it. The main themes that we garnered from the feedback we got is more trainings and a better spread of experience during step-up nights. So things like pairing inexperience with experience as well sort of comes into that in the sort of step-up night experience. So those were 2 big things. Easier missions was one of them, and out-of-game content, so things that you guys can read in your own time, that was another. And finally, I think the last sort of biggest theme was better moderation or enforcement of feedback during debrief. So we'll talk about more trainings later, because we do a bunch of feedback about trainings towards the middle. But for now, we'll talk on easier missions and sort of better experience spread during step up. So the reason we do step up missions is obviously so that new people step up, and we make step-up missions easier in 2 different ways, and those 2 ways are AI difficulty, so the factions you face are simpler in mind. They have less, aiming and spotting and general skills. So that makes it easier for the general player who wants to step up to, a different role and not, hopefully experience too much, AI bullshit. Though it is armor, it will always happen. And the second way we make things easier is in the simplicity of the mission. So that's, maybe objectives are marked overtly and there aren't, a bunch of defenses off the objective point that aren't marked on the map and whatnot. So that makes things a lot easier for especially platcoms in planning the missions. I think in the feedback it was brought up that sometimes recently step-ups have been more difficult than they should be, and I think that's probably definitely true for certain missions that step-up has been run on. Definitely one of my missions where an accident through mission setup or Zeusing led to mortars going off on friendlies, and so sometimes with step-ups, mistakes are made in mission setup or accidents happen in Zeus or just, lapses in judgment. Maybe we thought something would be easier than it is, but it isn't. And so as for that feedback, we'll try and clamp down on those mistakes or lapses in judgment and make sure that step-up nights are the experience that we intend them to be. We're definitely not intending them to be more difficult than normal missions. All right, better experience of spread during missions and step-ups is important. This is something that as mission makers we do when we are monitoring slot screen. But I guess there are some challenges with that. So we've been trying to be more hands-on with the slot screen, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword. In one sort of case, if we don't moderate slot screen, or rather, sorry, we do moderate slot screen too harshly, so, maybe someone wants to step up to Plat Sarge the first time and we don't think they've had enough the squad leader experience, and we say, no, best to stick to squad leader. That can offend people or annoy people. It can make a slot screen take a much longer time. Yeah, in general, players like to take the roles that they think, they're experienced for and the roles that they want to take. But obviously, the flip side of that is if we let anyone take any role, then the players would suffer because, we wouldn't have that spread of leadership or anything like that. But on the flip side, if we do moderate it, or rather, fuck me, the flip side, if we don't moderate it harshly enough, we can end up in those situations where there's too much inexperience in the platoon, and the mission flow suffers and the players suffer. So this is a really difficult thing to solve. We're not really sure which way we should lean towards. In fact, in this survey alone, both opinions were expressed. I think 1 or 2 people said, we should let the people take the roles that they think they're ready for, and then other people have said, we need to bar leadership from people who aren't ready. So it's clear that community is in 2 minds with it, and it's like I said, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So the outcome of this is we'll think about it and talk about it into staff as to what we think is an appropriate way to moderate slot screen and whether we need to think it's needs to be moderated more or less. Okay, what was next? Out of game.
Next part if you want. I can take the next part if you want.
Out of game content.
Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So what we're looking for in out of game content is more ways to be able to help improve the general leadership capability of our players. This doesn't mean necessarily going and having you watch a quite literal video essay from US military from start to finish saying this is how a squad leader works and everything. It's not that. It's meant to be short, simple, sharp sort of a piece of information, sometimes a little bit longer, but it can give you a nice little introduction into ways that you can improve as a squad leader. So one of the big things we're starting to look at, and I believe Hawaiian has prepared some of this, is to include a general game material sort of setup. So this can be a thing such as a flow chart for our trainings, how the general progression of that goes, what roles you need to fulfill to be able to get into armored training or rotary wing and so forth on there. Another thing that we're looking at is general client side settings for mods. So we know a lot of people, and this because it happened a few weeks ago, didn't know about the ACE view distance limiter, and have actually been playing at like 1,000 meters view distance. When on some roles, it's good to have that bit of extra view distance, and on other roles, it's good to have shorter view distance, such as nighttime missions. And another thing that we were thinking of is general information or supporting videos of how to do particular roles. So, for example, with rotary wing transport, when every time Hawaiian and Jimmy run it, they often post the example videos, the training missions where you can basically destroy your helicopter and practice all these tasks. These are kind of out of game and out of ZSU materials that you can use to be able to see the call for rotary wing. And other things such as Dyslexies, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a great guide that they have from ShackTac of how to do squad lead.
TP3, I think.
That's the one. It's a good guide. It tells you from start to finish a really good setup of how to be team leaders, squad leaders, and vice versa for that. But yeah, we're looking to try and put that together for newer players and existing players to have access to, and kind of set the groundwork for you guys to be able to learn outside of the game as well as inside the game. And speaking of being inside the game and the ZSU learning process, Hawaiian, if you want to take on the debrief part.
Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to find the image of the training flowchart for later. But
I'll search for that if you want to keep going.
You
I'll
go
put it up.
for it. Go for it. All right. So debrief. That's a very important part of the learning process. Obviously, the reason we do it is to tell people, what they did good and what they should be doing more of, and why it was specifically good. And on the flip side, what we could improve in a mission, why it needs improving, and how it could be improved. So those are the two key, positive constructive feedback and negative constructive feedback parts. We acknowledge that sometimes debrief is done poorly, and that's from anyone, including the mission maker. And so some of the times it's too much negative feedback, and that can obviously dissuade new leaders. Sometimes the feedback given is utterly useless because of the way it's spoken, or it's not verbosely, I guess, conveyed well enough. So yeah, everyone's guilty of it, as I said. Saying generalized statements like "comms were bad tonight" is probably not good feedback. Drilling into specifically, why exactly were comms bad? Was it miscalls? Was it confusing handshakes? Were people not concise enough? And then going into, how can this specific issue, like for example handshakes, how can that be avoided in the future? And then it's maybe practice doing handshakes at the start of the mission with the call signs, or something like that. But yeah, saying feedback like comms are bad is what we want to be avoiding in the future, and I think it's probably been slipping a fair bit lately. So one of the ways we're trying to combat this is, some people might have noticed that me especially and some of the other staff members have been asking squad leaders or whatever leaders what they're going to say during the leadership debrief, and making sure that they note those comments down. This is definitely an avenue of improvement. It certainly cuts down on the time that debrief takes when it comes to the leadership debrief, and make sure that people are, making concise comments about the mission. I think one of the other ways we can probably improve the quality of people's debrief feedback is to perhaps improve player-to-player feedback by adding something into the, where we add things into the like Zeus Mission Rally Point, where we add the IP. I think we could probably do something like that, except put it in the debrief channels, and it's, maybe a short guide on how. We'll get to that in a second, Billy. A short guide on, how to do a proper debrief and what constitutes as constructive feedback versus what's not constructive feedback. And so I think that would probably be a worthy way of trying to quickly improve the quality of people's debrief. And additionally, we might look at adding something into the leadership training that directly addresses debrief and constructive criticism. All right. I think that does it for what can be done by the staff members.
Do we want to touch on what Billy just said put in Armor General as well?
Yeah, so Billy's written, a suggestion for out-of-game material would be a screenshot of a planned out objective with labels and descriptions of key elements of the plan, i.e. why the zone's divided in such a way, or why this path through Defilade was taken. Only thought of this now, so apologies for not getting into the survey. Yeah, so that's a good thought. I think when it comes to the leadership training, a lot of it is like map skills and planning skills, and especially a lot of it involves drawing on the map, drawing plans on the map, and critiquing them. And I think that that's good as it exists in the leadership training, but potentially we can draw up a few meta plans, so to speak, and maybe add those somewhere, and a pinned message or a link to something like that. All right, we'll read Jimmy's and Trav's comments on these, and then we'll move on. Do you want to do that, Toaster?
Yeah, so Jimmy has put the comment also how debrief might be disseminated from platcom to squads to squad leaders to FTLs to team leaders to team members. So I'm assuming from what. Oh, okay. So I'm assuming what you mean by that, Jimmy, is by basically in a bigger context of debrief, you can have your squad leader talk.
He's written briefing, not debrief.
Oh. Oh, okay. So you're talking about just in general planning on the objective on there, how to better invoke the breakdown of what everyone's responsibility is, at least from my understanding on there. I think this might be something that we might need to come back to. I'm not sure how we can exactly answer this at the exact time. Unless you've got something, Hawaiian.
No. Cool. And Trav's simple debrief format used in other groups is sustain what we did well, improve what we could have been done better, and fix what went wrong. Yeah, so we will explore options for debrief, and as a staff team together formulate something that we think fits for our unit, and something that can be simply put into the debrief channels, pinned there, and something that's really clear and easy to understand for people. All right. Feedback from the community about encouraging leadership. No, that's the first point. All right. Feedback from the community about what the community can do to foster leadership. Sorry. So I'm going to touch on 2 points here because I think most of it was repeated or touched on in the staff section. So more encouragement from players was one of the common themes, as you can see. So we're on to page 8. And so yeah, definitely more encouragement. Encouragement helps. I think scientifically speaking, positive reinforcement is extremely effective compared to negative reinforcement. And so encouragement is a good way to reinforce good habits. So, if you see good team play in the mission from maybe your buddy or someone in your fire team, things like people taking rear security without someone needing to tell them to, maybe people spotting for the AR or vehicle gunners, and other things like specifically, playing your designated role. So the medic making sure that everyone's, stitched up and has blood, maybe in a drive between objectives. Things like that, that is, signifies a good team player. And I think those things should be rewarded in game with, a compliment. And that's like a very simple thing to do, but hard to think of and do during the mission at the same time. But I think, yeah, encouragement is a really important thing. And so things like that might help encourage people to step up to team lead when it comes to squad leading and platoon commanding. I think the same process can be applied. But yeah, what else?
It's good to keep an eye on the little things with that as well. I mean, a lot of our players that we have will generally complement new medics and everything on there. But some new team leaders may come up with a small plan. They might have these small little ways that they manage to indicate their intent for the plan, like how they speak, what type of language they use, or just the tone of voice they use to give the idea of how quickly something needs to be done. And it's the little things that can really reward players, saying, I think you've got the right idea, by just taking this little thing and expanding on it a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think this ties in with debrief, definitely. Lots of people can quickly identify what went wrong during the mission, but identifying the positives during the mission can be a lot more difficult. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about debrief. Maybe if you don't mention something at the time, just note it down and mention it during debrief. Outside of that, just try and be patient and understanding under new leadership. People will make mistakes. It happens when you're learning. It's just a natural part of the process. Helping people learn from the mistakes they make rather than flaming them. Everyone's going to be better off in that situation. And tying in with the last point, I think this happened a week ago, and thus maybe it's popped up in the feedback. But this definitely happens more than just once a week or once in a blue moon. But it's something that was brought up by the players. So it's about the fact that feedback should be given in, like, negative feedback should be given in debrief only in the form of constructive criticism. So, slagging someone off because you didn't like their decision during a mission is obviously not appropriate. It's just something that, is somewhat obscured to someone like me who is, always in leadership roles, but this doesn't happen under me, and that's an understandable thing because who is going to slag off the one of the two guys with all the power? And I frequently sort of am the disciplinary role because I was the sole GC for a very long time. So that's fine. No one's going to do it under me, but that doesn't mean it's appropriate to do it under anyone else. And definitely in the same vein of the last thing, like flaming people for things is, much less effective than positive reinforcement, and you'll be told off for it. If you do it multiple times, then you're gone from the mission, or you know, across missions multiple times, you're gonna take a holiday. So yeah, it's one thing to suggest an alternate plan constructively during the mission, but obviously the opposite of just saying like, oh, why are we attacking this from here, lol, during the mission, you know, is egregious. It's rude. It's not helpful. So definitely, if I hear it in game, you know, we'll call you out on it. That's part of the reason staff members exist, to make sure that that stuff is monitored. Obviously, we've lost some staff members, and so we have less of a spread of staff across the platoon. But yeah, you can bet that staff will be sort of reinforced about this idea of not tolerating that kind of thing. All right, Toaster.
In terms of feedback from leadership, I think we're more or less covered most of that there, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we're moving on.
Cool, easy as. So, moving on to our functional mods and content mods, terrain mods, everything mod related, more or less. So, as you can see with the functional mods, pretty much we did get a couple of suggestions on there. Not too overly many, but more or less Hawaiian and myself are going to have a look at that and see if they can fit into the kind of ZSU mod set. We have had one recently, which I believe was recommended by Atlas, which was the disabled HUD mod, which has actually come in really handy for a lot of players who take screenshots in game. And so we're always open to taking in suggestions if you believe it is something that will work for our mod set or adds a bit of extra value to it. In terms of content mods, we did get a couple of these as well, and obviously we will always look at them. But one thing that did pop up and does pop up later as well is kind of German sort of content. And I think myself and a few other people have looked at this, and we do think that it does have enough popularity or interest in it that once BAF has run its course, our kind of national FOB in the sense of, you know, playing a sort of superpower like we have with EMU as the ADF and also Marin as the French, we're looking at those sort of German conflict scenarios and all revolve around there, whether it be in the the Middle East or around the world. Onto the big part though, which really kind of makes or breaks how well missions can be run with, you know, if things break, or, you know, just giving some fresh sort of content to the players, and that is terrain mods. So we had a lot of people suggesting old terrains that we have actually run. Very popular was Gossalrek, which if you've been around for a little bit, you'll know was the map Marin ran on. And so because we actually got a lot of requests for some of the old maps, such as Gossarak, I believe Klafgan was one of them as well, we do have an idea, and we're not sure how we would pull it off or when it would happen, but of potentially rotating out old maps and things like that, or rotating out some of our FOBs again. But one thing that Hawaii and I are really happy to talk about, you guys are, about is our idea that we've come with of adding more maps and smaller maps to the mod set to be able to allow mission makers to create shorter campaigns or a single mission sort of one-off scenario. So what we have compiled over the course of a weekend, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago, was it about 55 different terrains, Hawaiian, I think it was?
I think it was like more. I think it was 60 something, but anyway.
Yeah, pretty much we went around for an entire weekend, flying around different sorts of maps, reviewing them, looking at their attention to detail, basically how well they are, how interesting of a map they are, and judging if this would be good for a FOB, a scenario, like a short campaign or missions. And essentially we got a lot of insight into sort of maps on there. We noticed certain styles from certain certain map makers from there. So what we are hoping to do is be able to basically rotate and add these maps in, which shouldn't bloat our mission files too much, or sorry, bloat our mod set too much. And in the hopes that mission makers can have a look at this, get inspired by something, and create short campaigns or one-off missions, and release their creativity in a sense, because they take interest in this certain setup. You know, you got Turbo's Ash Valley sort of setup with the scripting on there, and then you could add this with other maps, which we've noticed, where Hawaii and I have come up with certain maps, certain ideas for other maps as well, which we really like and have an interest in. So we hope to bring this out soon and give a bit more, options for our mission makers. Moving into client-side mods from here, we once again did have a couple of suggestions on here, which we will look at and see if they do fit into basically our mod set and if they add value. And that is the key thing: is if these mods add value and add some form of uniqueness to our mission set, mod set, we will most likely put it in. One thing that was brought up as well is the disabling of group icons and also name indicators. As far as we're aware, we might be able to disable that in Ace add-ons. We will look into it. It is really a concept decision of if it will add a bit more challenge to the mission in a positive light or make it more difficult for our players, especially seeing as we have just gone into, talking about new leaders stepping up.
I think I wrote that note, and I think it was, I think it's possible in the add-on settings as like a client-side option, but I didn't check it at the time. We'll have a look through again to make sure that that's possible with the Ace add-on UI settings. Right, you want to do special repo or me?
I'll go into it. I was looking to see if I could get a drumroll soundboard going up for this guy. I think this is a very hotly debated, or was very positive in terms of the mission. The survey feedback, I know we did have people going, why can we only pick 2? So it is very positive for us that you guys have basically overwhelmingly said one of the options on here. In this case, it was SOG, and this is what I was talking about earlier, where it's also really good to see that SOG ownership is really high, especially for a creator content DLC. Generally, as GlobalMod shows, they have been really low, but obviously there must be a lot of interest in SOG, and it's really good to see that it basically washed out everything else. So sometime in the future, we will look at trying to swap these around the mod sets when we believe IFA has run its course or there is a bit less interest on it. Obviously, the only real concern that we have with SOG is that because it is a paid DLC, there is a larger barrier for entry on there. Unlike all the other options that we have on here, which are mods, which are free, SOG does require a payment. But based off the feedback that we got that most people already own it, it may be less of an issue than we believe it. Maybe less of an issue than what it actually is. And Hawaiian, do you want to take on the fobs and factions?
Bobs, yeah, let's do it. Cool. All right. I think this is listed in order of elderness. Which fobs factions do you enjoy playing the most? So Borscht has been around for a long time. It's been around for what do we say, Toast? A year?
Borscht, just over a year, which barring Altus is pretty much, well, like the original MAL is pretty much the longest running fob.
Yeah, pretty much. Which is, for me, who made, or at least remade part of 4 of the fobs on the list, that means 1 fob every 3 months, which is a good bit of work considering how long it takes to make a fully functional operating fob. Lots of time and creative energy goes into them, and so in saying that, Borscht is on its way out. I think on the survey here it's tied equally with Vermilion, which is the second to last fob introduced. In first position is Fob Empire, and so that's no different to what it's been in the past. Every single sort of different nationality fob that we introduced, whether it was ADF or the French Marines or Fob Empire here, those specific content mods for BAF, the French content and ADF content always come out on top. So glad to see the trend is not being broken this time around. So Empire, good popular fob, brilliant, and it's nice to see that the latest 2 fobs are also at a decent level. All right, and fobs / factions from the past. So I'm sure some people might not recognize many of these, if any. but we've gone ahead and sort of careered you guys for this, not just, for the purpose of bringing them back or anything. There are certain things here that we won't bring back because we no longer have cup maps in the mod set, so Takistan, Sarani, we wouldn't be bringing those back. But it's good to see the sort of themes and whatnot that you guys enjoyed in the past. So again, Fob Marin and Fob Emu, those content nationality fobs are high. Surprisingly, Fob Vodka was high, considering the balancing issues and the complaints from players at the time. So it's good to know that maybe, returning to Chinaris or returning to a situation of Russia versus the US is, a potential for us. Otherwise, good to know. Yep.
Yeah, we believe, at least from what we understand from the players, due to Vodka's challenge, a lot of maybe our regular players and people who step up into regular leadership struggled in the sense of, they were demandingly challenged and dealing with situations that could sometimes ultimately not be avoided, whether it be mascats and everything. And so we think this is probably the main reason why Vodka is higher on the list than we thought it would be. But we would enjoy your feedback in terms of why you think it's a good fob or why you think you enjoyed yourself on those fobs. The other reason we think is it's Chernarus. Chernarus has always been a popular map since like Arma 2, pretty much.
Yeah. All right. You want to do factions?
Yes, sure. Let me get back onto my notes. Okay. So with the factions, we often see similar suggestions pretty much every year. We know there's always one person who votes for Canada. That person has always expressed their at must, we need to run Canada, and I'm sure a couple of people will know who that is and be probably giggling that they see it on here every year. But one of the other things that we still see on here every year is Germany, which we did bring up earlier about that potentially becoming our next national fob. The German mod sets, in terms of what's available, are very well made, and we do believe that it offers a different enough variety for players to be able to enjoy a different national fob. There were actually some unique oddities that did come out of this. Normally, we do see things such as Gulf Wars and Surges come up, which is possible. Sometimes not the easiest to pull off, but is possible. But one thing that really interested both Hawaiian and myself were Asian forces. Both the Koreas, North and South, Japan, South Korea, and China. I personally had never even thought about things like that. But I believe there are actually a couple of mods out there which may be good to run because they use slightly different weaponry. They have different styles of gameplay and everything on there. Another thing that also surprised us was the Scandinavian factions. Things like Sweden, which I believe has another mod out there as well. I can't remember the mod that someone suggested with it, but we do have access to the survey to get that back. And once again, we do have our national fobs that we have run in the past, such as France and the ADF, which is given that people will suggest it because obviously, especially in the case of Marin, as you saw with fobs that people played previously, there definitely is a love for Marin in terms of, just playing as a French. It's something slightly different.
Yeah. I think after Germany, potentially, getting an Asian force weaponry and equipment would be a good way to go. Next survey. Okay, trainings. Next page 14. What days would you guys prefer to run trainings on? This is an overwhelming majority of Saturday and Sunday, which is, what we're doing already.
And it's also expected, pretty much, because, everyone should have, well, most people, unless you're like me, where you get Sunday, Monday, have these days off. So it means you are most likely to be able to attend these trainings, whether it's run early, late afternoon, or maybe late in the evening for whatever reason.
Yep, and for the majority of the people who run trainings in our staff team, which is I think most of us now, the weekends just suit people. So, yeah, not too much else to say about that. From this feedback, we will, continue running trainings on the weekend. Maybe things like QDEs, if we're going to increase frequency of those could be run on Wednesday night, given the feedback. But yeah, otherwise trainings will continue to run on the weekend. Right, you want to go through training suggestions?
Yep. And following on from that, we have training suggestions. We always look at these because we do like to see what the community wants, and it gives us some different ideas and some introspectives as well as to, is this feasible for us to be able to do? Can we teach it, and can we run it? Can we make it work? And so basically off the responses that we got here, it breaks down into several different types of training. A popular one was the UGV/UAV training, along with recon training, marksman training, special forces / tier 1 operator sort of training, CQB, and fixed wing CAS. And basically, I'm just going to break down our responses and how we feel these can be implemented into our gameplay in terms of, is it possible? So firstly, UAV and recon. We've thought about this before, and I believe Hawaiian has actually done a mission on Vermilion with the drone before, and we did like the results. UAV is something that we believe it can be not necessarily easily implemented, but implemented quite well into our mod set. And we will most likely look at this in the future. As to a timeline as to when and how, that is unknown at the current time. But with recon as well, we've also thought about recon. The only issue that we can see in this is that if we do add things like a UAV, a separate recon team that's actually done, manually by people could be completely overshadowed by the UAV. So it's what we want to implement. We do personally believe that the UAV may be a bit more fun of a role in there. How recon does have its viability at the same time. The only issue with recon is how useful can it be if the platoon can already do it, or is there going to be issues with having 2, maybe 3 people operating separately to platoon when the platoon may need some more rifles and things like that? So it's a question for us to be able to internally look at if it's viable to add. So UAV, more or less, yeah, we want to add this, and we will be looking at ways to add this. Recon, we will have to probably have a few more internal discussions with our staff team and everything on there if it's viable and feasible for us to add. Moving on to the next one, which is marksman training.
Hold on.
Yep.
Go back to squad where you get kicked for asking or taking the marksman role. Now go.
Yep. So marksman training. It's something that we feel is often requested, but we're not too sure if it has too much of a place in ZSU. Obviously, that joke Hawaiian made is a bit of an offhand joke, but yeah, marksman at times, there are people out there who can make anything work and be really good at the role and bring it forward and add absolutely such good value to the squad. Marksman at times, it's very hard to do that, and sometimes people take it way too seriously in this role and can really, unfortunately, sometimes ruin the fun for others. In our current mod set, in terms of our ballistics and our wins and everything on there, it's not often that it's not uncommon that you see riflemen with, the M16s that we have a mile and everything using the ACOG and taking 700-meter pot shots. A 5.56 rifle, generally in real life, in terms of real terms, would be, that 4 to maybe 600-meter range, and the marksman, that, 800-meter range. It kind of makes it a bit harder to implement this in terms of a way that's viable, functional, and adds value. Then that's the key point, adding value. Another thing that we believe may also nullify the marksman role is an M&G Mantis team. Slap a scope on the GPMG and you've got a weapon with the same caliber that has more functionality to the capabilities of the squad. Suppressing targets, hitting light armor-skinned vehicles, suppressing them as well as even engaging light-skinned helicopters, because you can pump a lot of rounds out quickly and hopefully one of those hits and maybe drops a helicopter. In terms of advanced marksman skills, like actual sniping marksman skills, it's very hard to implement in a mission sense. If you have your 2-man sniper spotter team, they could sit there for the entire mission and just take that one perfect shot. Sure, some people will enjoy that, but others really won't at times. Another thing is like how to implement this. If you have a HVT and the sniper team spots it while the platoon's clearing out the entire objective, they could just take it out, and then the platoon's efforts and everything can be kind of wiped out. But this 2-man sniper team has just completed the entire objective on their own. It's more of a balancing issue. I personally struggle to try and see how we can implement it, but maybe in future people can give us more feedback and everything on there. So for the meantime, we probably won't be looking at as a training as much as we are with UAV and recon trainings. Going on to the other part as well, Special Forces training once more struggles to fit within the ZSU playstyle. To my understanding with what people mean when they say Special Forces training, it is like a highly skilled sort of team, generally having a bit more higher tech gear than the regular infantry, operating in a small units tactics sort of scenario. I don't believe this necessarily needs a training. It is more if the mission maker wants to make this Special Forces team like Jimmy has with Viper before, or I believe Tim back in the day when we had Emu had Phantom, which is my call sign now, as a Special Forces ADF team as well. Really what this training comes down to, if we were to try and implement something, is trainings that we already have. To operate well in the Special Forces team when running in other units play with as well, it requires good communication, good use of formations, and basically tactical awareness of the small squad, which should already be applied from small unit tactics and leadership. By creating this sense of training, it's more or less bloating up a lot of things on there. It also kind of defines a different sort of play style. In terms of Special Forces operations sort of stuff, it's hard to implement in terms of a grand platoon or company sense. A lot of units that do run those Special Forces type of operator units, they're generally a smaller unit. They operate from sometimes 1 to 10 people. And when you have those trainings, breaching doors and everything, it's fun and engaging for those 1 to 10 people. When you stretch it up potentially up to like 30 people, or even the 4-man team, it kind of loses its viability, as most players will feel equal even if they have different gear. And that brings us on to the next point. CQB, similar sort of scenario. It's kind of already taught in small unit tactics, using your formations, your buddy working, cutting the pie or slicing the cake, however you want to word it, working around your corners and everything. Once again, we don't feel it's really necessary. And things like that. And Turbo also raised a good point. Special Forces training, people think it's the real thing, and they do become, in a sense, a little bit of a elitist, thinking, I've done this training, I'm so cool. And we never want to invoke that in our group. If you are acting like that, it's not fun for anyone else. And on a more positive note, fixed wing Kaz. We really want to implement it, and I hate to tell you this, it's currently not being worked on. Ever since over the last few months, we've really grown. We've got a lot more units, and we've got a lot more positive players and everything on there. We want to implement fixed wing CAS. It's just building it into the FOBs, making sure we have an effective qual, which test players to make sure this is done correctly. The last thing that we want, same with rotary wing and rotary wing CAS, is a bird crashes and kills the entire platoon. The CAS helicopter does the strafing run of missiles on the entire platoon because they didn't know the friendlies were there. Or in this case, the fixed wing CAS drops a bomb on the entire platoon. The reason why we have these calls is to make sure that these things are avoided. And, if these are done intentionally or, consistently, we can go, hey, we think you need to be recalled. So it's just a matter of, one, when we can find time to work on it and implement it into what we want to do on how we want it to run in ZSU. So it's not a no, it's pretty much a yes. It's just a matter of when and how.
Yeah, I'll quickly touch on it with, I guess, a final lens, because I wrote and created the rotary wing close air support quals myself, and I did partially with the help of Jimmy the what are they called, rotary wing transport quals. Doing quals is like an extreme amount of effort, and you do have to be an expert in the thing you are creating quals for. There's no point being a half-baked fixed wing pilot and trying to make a qual for it when realistically you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. nobody in our staff team is a fixed wing expert, and this is not an invitation for thank you, Rusted. This is not an invitation for experts to weigh in and say, oh, I think I can make the qual. We would like to do it from a staff perspective, and we would like to do it right. And so, again, it'll be in the future. No one knows how to do it right now, and it's a significant amount of effort to create those quals. So, yeah. And there are definitely other priorities.
Yeah, to create a training in general is very long and arduous. Like Mortar Trainings was worked on for several months between 3 people.
Yeah, I'll touch on what Billy said quickly because I think it's a good point. Raising the issue of balance in missions. The reason I want to talk about it is because it aligns a lot with the way we do rotary wing close air support. With rotary wing CAS, we generally only have pilot controlled weaponry, and that's because for the entire platoon at large, it's not very enjoyable to have a nose cannon on a helicopter spewing 30 mil rounds at all the contacts in the AO, and taking away the fun for the rest of the infantry. And so obviously when fixed wing comes around, there will be a similar sort of, I guess, thought pattern applied to balancing of that, just to make sure that the mission can still be fun for everyone involved, and the balance can be preserved.
We don't want to create the situation like in War Thunder where you have just all your planes coming in to attack your tanks because people want to play tanks. Or helicopter spam. I bet you all who play War Thunder know exactly what I'm talking about, and I feel sorry for you.
All right, page 16. I think we're done with that. Yeah, nice. How satisfied are you with the helpfulness of our training? So we're moving on to the metrics section of the survey. And so we do these every single time. And so helpfulness of the training is similar to what it's been in the past, skewed slightly towards 4 this time instead of 5. I think probably this has got a lot to do with the main feedback that we'll go through in a minute, but a lot of that was regarding frequency of training, which obviously there is a question for. Next page, page 17. So slipping with frequency of training, but it's not, how do you say? It's not to do with a change of how often we've run our trainings, just a change in perspective of players, because I think between now and then, we've always ran one training once a fortnight. It alternates with when we do our staff meetings for armor, and so that suits us very much so. And part of the, I think, dip in frequency of training is also due to the fact that we've got more trainings now. So back when maybe we were doing this once a fortnight, a year and a half ago, we had maybe 2 less trainings.
We had, I think small unit tactics, leadership, armored.
I don't want to go through them all, but I think we definitely used to have less trainings than we currently do, and now it takes, as a result of that, it takes a longer time to rotate through all of the different trainings. That's that's just how it is for now. I think if we want to improve the frequency of our trainings, the first step is getting more staff members, and that'll come in time. So I think we talk about it in a minute. No, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, as for frequency, currently, given that we've got limited staff members, it's still only going to be running once a fortnight on those off weeks from our meeting. But yeah, we'll make sure we're definitely keeping up with that schedule. Right. Additional training feedback, Toast?
Yes. So obviously you guys can see the responses we got there. Really what I've collated this down is to people asking a lot for the voting system. The voting system, for the most part, did allow players to be able to choose what they wanted to run. However, it did have several flaws. One of the main flaws that we had was that we put the notifications off for training. At this training, what training do you want to be run at this time on this day? Already informing players that when it's going to be run, vice versa. What would happen is, and it happened on several occasions, not every occasion, is that the training that got the most votes and maybe edged one out by one vote. All of a sudden, out of the 6 people who reacted to it, 3 turned up. And it's hard because the training that had 5 votes and everyone wanted to show up, everyone was available, could have been run, and we could have called more people for everything. So it did have a bit of an issues, but it also did show a lot of interest into what people wanted to be run. There is potential for it to come back in a sense of, maybe every now and again when we don't know exactly what we want to run, or the start's, free to run whatever they can. We may bring it back and bring that suggestion back to you. But for the most part, we generally have an idea of what needs to be run to be able to get people to get going on there, and get them into the roles that they want to do, especially things like training and small unit tactics, as those are your intermediary sort of roles.
I'll quickly touch on that. Like the way it was done is voting, and that really didn't turn out well because people would vote for medical training at 1400 on Sunday, and so the time is displayed there. They said they wanted to go to medical training, and no one would turn up. So obviously we stopped that. But as for the way we decide how trainings are run, a lot of it is just discussion on those fortnightly meetings about what do we think the players are currently missing. Have we had a new influx of new players, and what are we planning to be running mission wise in the future? So for an example, because you've mentioned it, Billy, specialty trainings like close air support, forward air controller hasn't been run because realistically the only people who are has qualled for piloting is myself and Rusted. We used to have one more who played with us, but he no longer plays with us, so we're the only 2 people qualified for CAS, and that is a difficult situation because that means that I can't Ripperoldo, yes. That means that I can't ever make a mission with close air support on it, because then I'm relying for Rusted to turn up. And so for now, CAS stuff is to an extent on pause, and so it's not worth running a training that trains for something that we can't run often, right?
I think you should mention that Rotary Ring and CAS isn't really more of a training; it is a qualification. You go into it with expected knowledge, and we ask you, or well, Hawaiian would ask you, do this, do this, do this, and if you succeed, you get the qualification. It's not a training where we teach you how to do, how to land safely, how to engage the target. It's expected knowledge when going into it.
Yes, so this is more so just I guess between the current pilots, and I think I've resent it to some of the current pilots, but maybe I can look at reposting Rotary CAS qual info somewhere maybe in this channel. But yeah, that's always open to the pilots that pass Rotary transport. It's just organized on a one-on-one basis, and so yeah. All right, that was a distraction. Do you want to continue?
Yes, definitely. So the next point on there, which we have touched on a little bit but previously, was external content. So obviously we did have the TTP3 touched on from Shaktak. Another thing that we are looking at trying to bring up is also external training maps created by our staff team. So one of the ones that I'm currently working on, but obviously we had to prepare for this, so it's delayed a little bit, is the training map for mortars, which will basically give a little bit of details, have some of the content that we had in the training itself, such as, the milliradian calculation for dispersion, the formula, which we may break down a little bit more in this training map as well. And will allow you to give you fire missions to test out and practice your skills, practice getting quicker at those calculations, as well as a bit of examples and details how you can go, okay, well, I've hit fire missions 1 through 20. I'll just start creating my own, and how to do that and everything from there. So we're looking at trying to get things like that up and running. So in your free time, if you want to learn something a bit more, you can practice it, and you can do it with the right skill set or the right training modules in mind. Other than that, Hawaiian, I think for additional training feedback, there wasn't much more on there, unless you have anything else you'd like to add.
No, I think some of the feedback, it was nice to see that was understanding of the fact that it takes time and effort to run the trainings, and it's completely dependent on the trainer of the day running it. So that's nice of you all. Yeah, it's just one of those things. All right, okay, yeah. All right, we can talk about radio training. I think radio training is mentioned most surveys, but is never done, because I think every time we've talked about it after the surveys have been gone and done, we just like, it's so difficult to make a training for radios in the traditional sense of how we run trainings. Like Turbo said, it's a good thing for a QDE. So leadership QDE has a lot of information about radio comms, and it's I don't think it's something that fits into the traditional training structure that we have, but QDEs are definitely good for it. Yeah, like Turbo said, what info to send up and down the chain is in the QDE. In small unit tactics, we have a section on radios about what information